and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. On today's show, I get to sit down again, and I'm now interviewing somebody today from the Spanko community. I know for a while everybody's been kind of asking me to look into this community. I've gotten some requests about it. And to be very honest with a lot of you, it's not a community that I actually know a lot about. It is a big subculture for many of us inside of the BDSM community that I do know it exists. It's really quite fascinating when you start looking at all the different aspects that reside within the Spanko community and the Spankies who are there, and how some of this, all of this, kind of manifests itself inside of the lifestyle. So today, I'm sitting down with Spanks, or as some of you will eventually learn his name because I will put it up in the description. On Fetlife, he's known as DrSpankologist. I want to say thank you so much for you taking the time today out of your really busy schedule for us to coordinate over the last about 6 weeks to sit down and do this interview.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So I know pardon me, you and I have had some pre-recording good conversations so far. When I started putting this together, I didn't really know what I was going to get when I started talking to you. So I appreciate you kind of giving me some of the insights. So I guess a really good place to start is, how did you first discover your interest for spanking, and what kind of drew you to it to take it further?
I think honestly, Chris, I was pretty much shot out of my mom's vagina, slapped on the ass, and thought this planet isn't that bad. I don't think there was ever a definite time where I said, I thought like spanking's in for me. It was a curiosity as a kid. I grew up in the 70s, and I don't know if you were where you were in the 70s, but there was a lot of somebody's going to get spanked in this neighborhood, or,
Mm-hmm.
send me out right to somebody's house, and somebody's hot mom was going to spank you if you didn't behave. And that kind of started the kink. And then it just kind of grew from there.
Interesting. Actually, it's a little bit that I've looked into it. A lot of people who are older, because yes, I remember those days. As a matter of fact, I was telling somebody the other day, I remember the only time that, be home by 5, and it was 6 o'clock when my father picked me up and he was like, go to your room and grab a belt. And I'm just terrified. Never actually got the spanking. It was more about the terror. I think that's why I'm more of a sadist, because I enjoy the fear play. Right. But
Yeah.
I do remember some of those days, like the whole basically screw around and find out. So, yeah, that's really interesting though for you. Did you feel weird when it initially kicked off for you? Like, hey, I kind of like that, or how was it for you?
It was it was interesting, probably a little sexual, but I didn't know what sex was at the time. Um, it was just an interesting concept. And I've always liked women. I'd start looking at girls' butts and kind of be like, I wonder like how it would be for them to spank me. And then like the nudity kicked in, right? And from there, it just went on to what would it be like, to have some hot chick or somebody's mom spank me. Never really on the male side, though.
Do you in do you in any of the things that you've ever done, have you ever interacted with guys either way, or are you strictly only involved with women?
No, I've had some experiences with the male as well.
So how what tell me the difference between that and even how you even would set up a scene like that.
I will say the first time there was a male involved, I went to a spanking party, and I was over some girl's lap, and she was spanking me, and he said, "Well, you're not doing it right." And I really didn't know a whole lot about it. And he was standing right there, and he's like, "Can I help you?" And she was like, "I don't care." And I'm like, "I guess, like, I'm over some girl's lap." I think that was the first time. And I've had a couple guys ask to spank me, or for me to spank them in the past as well. And it kind of depends. Some people yes, some people no. Same thing with women, though. Some girls yes, some girls no. It's a personal preference.
Interesting. I mean, hey, we all kind of have our preferences, but of course, now here comes the psychologist in me is coming out.
It's
And I apologize because I actually didn't send you this question, but now this has just popped into my head. Because for a lot of you who don't know, whenever I'm going to do an interview, I kind of send people questions. So we have a way to go, but then things like this happen. So
and
between what you said about when you were young and then what you were doing now, is there any emotional when you're doing some of these spanking scenes, is there anything emotional or cognitive going on for you? Like, is it a different form of catharsis for you?
I would, yeah, there's definitely headspace. There's headspace and subspace. I'm sure you're aware of, right? If it's a good scene, there's a lot of headspace involved. Sometimes, at a party, someone will stop by, hey, you can spank me real fast. Sure, it's more of a pain thing for them. But a good scene is a lot of headspace, and if you're got a great scene going, you'll get some subspace in there as well.
Do you? Okay, I mean that's first. That's awesome because I can automatically totally link in. Good, hard, intense scene. Put a mass for a while. For me, masochist or extreme masochist put them into their subspace. I, on occasion, will then obviously float into my top space. Does that happen for you during or after a spanking scene?
Yes, yes, yeah, it does. I'm a switch, so I can subspace as a bottom as well. Um, but definitely some headspace in there. And the after you're done playing, you get that good buzz, and then of course the next day you get the bad crash.
Yeah, yeah, and you're greedy too. Because sorry, I didn't actually know you were a switch, so you're greedy.
I
See,
am
I,
both
I
ways.
look, I love you switches and all, but you all are fucking greedy, right?
Fuck yeah!
You want both sides, and yeah.
I want a
Now
girl
that
to ask to spank me, and I want to spank her.
yeah, that's interesting. Is it do you choose somebody when you're in the sub mindset in the moment, or do you have a partner that you specifically play with?
So I play with a lot of people. Some people play with just two or three. I play with a lot of people. I will interview them first and see what type of person they are, uh, and I want a connection with them personally before I play with somebody. Not so much just how they look or how they are, but like an actual like link to them, like the personality, and we get along.
Right. That's well. I mean, again, I think there's a lot of us when you're at the point where you are at in the community, you're starting to take a more vested role, and it's more than just about spanking ass. It's really about if I'm connecting to that person and then kind of going through the entire scene with them. How let's 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 do a scene. No, we're not doing that.
Oh come on,
Um,
it'll be fun.
no, because I don't bottom for anyone, and yeah, no, I don't. Sorry. However, uh, take me through a scene, how you set it up, delivery, if you're doing cold or warm spankings, and also I'm going to be very curious about because look, and I argue the point that aftercare is something negotiated. Do you do that? Is that mandatory? Do you negotiate it? If you do it, and let's just go with the assumption you do, what's that look like for you all?
So I'm going to go with to kind of more fulfill your question there. I'm going to go with somebody I've never spanked before, and maybe I met them, and they're like, "I want to do this. I want to do this too. Great, let's talk." I like to talk to them first. I need to know a couple things about them, and obviously it varies where I'm at, but I want to know their experience. Like, have they done this before, or no? This is the first time. I want to go over a safe word with them, right? Everybody uses the stoplight system. So I want to make sure they know that. I want to make sure they don't have any medical conditions that I need to know of. And I want to make sure, and I want to talk to them about places on their body they can hit. I can hit. So some people, like don't hit the back of my feet or don't play with my hair, whatever. I'm also a sensualist. So I'll talk to them about tickling them if it's going to be a sensual scene or playing with their hair. And then I'll ask them directly, is it okay if I hit on you? I think those are the important things to get out of the way, the most important things before you start a scene. Um, and then depending on the scene, there's people who want punishment scenes or people who want spanking scenes. But the scene I do, kind of the house standard, is kind of a sensual play scene. I start off really slow, and I'll have somebody on a massage table, and I'll start off with fur floggers and drag them across their body. Start off with that for about 5 minutes, and then I'll move to some leather floggers and start leather floggering them. And then I'll give them a little break, right? So we hit them a little bit, then we give them a little takedown. Then we hit them on a little bit more, we hit on a little bit harder, and I'll eventually start working toward heavier floggers or leather. And I'll keep that same pattern. So you start off soft, give them a little rub down, start off a little bit harder, give them a little rub down. And each time you're bringing them up and then letting them drop a little bit. And I'll keep going that way, and I'll check in with them and kind of see where they are pain wise, mentally wise. until at some point in time the scene rents out. As far as aftercare goes, I'll talk to them about that. Some people have a good experience of what they want. Some people don't know. My aftercare kind of standard is I usually give them a nice oil rub when I'm done with them, and then leave them underneath the blanket on my massage table, for 10, 15 minutes, and let them just relax. And that's kind of the standard. Everybody's different.
Right. I mean, it's interesting. It's not unlike doing a heavy impact scene. Do you do most of your just do you recommend more for your style warm ups, or do you ever do cold spanking scenes?
Oh, I'll do everything. I did a cold caning the other day. That was great. It was a role play, and there was no warm up. There was a long talk about discipline, and then just a caning, and great cane marks from that. Other times, people just want slow play. It just depends on what my bottom wants. I don't particularly have something I do. It's what my bottom wants to have done.
I mean, that makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. I think, and what's interesting here, so I'm hearing the use of a different few implements. So, misconception time for me, I thought everything inside of the Spanko community was done by hand. Is that not true?
Oh no, there's some people I could not spank hard enough with my hand, and I had a friend actually who sent me a picture, and her hand and the entire inside of her palm was bruised. So I a lot of people I don't think, especially if they're in this community, you could spank with your hand hard enough.
Interesting. So, there you go. That dispels a lot of myths that were, even for me, to be honest with you, because I mean, I think almost every image you see of spanking scenes or spanking specific scenes is always the typical OTK, or for those who don't know what that means, over the knee, whether male or female over the knee, and then somebody bare hand spanking them. That's typically, and then even in some of the parties I've been, that's just typically what I've seen. Everything else that involves implement, then to me, then switches from spankings to impact play. So, how do you differentiate the difference between what you're doing and impact play?
So a spanking would be, in my mind, a spanking would be there's no warm up, right? You just give somebody a spanking, whether it be with your hand or a wooden paddle or a spoon. You just basically start off and you're just spanking them. Where a BDSM scene starts off, where you're working your way up through floggers, or it's the act of it. Like spanking is an act of putting somebody over your knee and spanking them, like you had said, or bending them over the bed, with a belt. That is like the Spanko part, and then there's the BDSM part of me as well.
Okay, so this ageist question is now going to come out. Do you ever get to the point where, so because I operate with the masochist, I'll even know sometimes that they're begging to stop because you're in a scene. If you do, you get to that point where you're still driving and pushing them beyond their limit? And I'm not talking in a point where we're not crossing harm, and that's not what I'm advocating. Before anybody riles up and wants to grab a pitchfork, because if you do, you're going to get knocked off your little podium anyway. But do you understand what I'm saying? Where you kind of get in that moment and you're like, yes, let's go. We are pushing a limit, and you feel the intensity, and then while they're writhing in the pain, they're also writhing in the pleasure.
We talked. Remember when we talked about negotiating earlier about the scene?
Hmm.
We talked about at that point, if they were like, I want this, maybe. Or so I like to negotiate my scenes at several points. So if I met somebody and they're like, hey, I want to come dungeon play, I want to play, or I want to be spanked, I would play with them. But and that scene would go so far. I wouldn't push it to the point that you're talking right now. But if they came by and we played quite often, two or three times, they're like, hey, I really want you to push my limits. I want you to pin me down. I want you to spank me as hard as you can. I want to be in tears and begging you to stop. And it was negotiated well before that play. Then
Sure.
that would be fine with that. I'm totally 100% okay with that.
Yeah, I should have probably prefaced that with longer term partners that and you have an existing, not somebody. I don't. That's probably one of the reasons I don't do pickup scenes much anymore with people I don't know or I've never had any interactions with. I'm a heavy sadist, so I don't play as rough, and it's intentional, especially when you get into fear and psychological play and interrogation scenes.
You're not going to beat somebody with a feather flogger, huh?
No, that's not even. a Monday afternoon. So that's pretty much, I've already burned that thing like 4 years ago. It's more like chains and razor blades and like little flails. But I mean, look, everybody's different. So yeah, to me, it did, what you were saying resonated, at least from my side, especially when you're working with somebody that you have a long term. Do you have long term partners that are, your scenes get more and more intense inside of the spanking?
I do. I have short term people that come by every 3 months for a spanking. I have people that I see maybe once a month that come by to play.
Now, is this is going to sound, well, it's not going to sound dumb because I think it's a question that's worth asking, but because maybe a lot of people don't know, do you specifically, do you just spank on the behind? Do you just spank somebody's ass? Let's just get to the meat of it. Is that all
Um,
you do?
I would say 80% yes. People like to have their backs flogged, the inside of their legs, the calves, the backside of their legs, right? And those can be other areas that you can hit on. You know, if your ass wears out, you've got some blisters, then you can move to your legs. Some people like their boobs, some people like their stomach. It just kind of depends on what people like. That's in the beginning. Ask where you can hit. And I don't know if you remember this. When I was a kid, Chris, there was a trade off. You know, when you're getting your ass spanked and it started being too much, you could ask for your thighs to be spanked. And it was a sucker's bet because your thighs usually hurt more than your ass.
Yeah.
You remember that?
I mean, look, for me, it was, I got hit once and I begged for my life and said I'll never do it again. As a matter of fact, I've only ever been spanked twice in my life as a child. That was enough. Those rules set in place, and yeah, I'll never forget them. And to this day, like, I've still learned, when I cross the street, look both ways. Right? Don't run into the middle of traffic like a moron as a
Yeah.
child. And the other one is, when you're told to be home at night, you're at home at night. Now I'm a little older, so I have more responsibility, but that message stuck true. If I'm running late, I make a phone call, I let somebody know. But yeah, I definitely understand what you mean. Like the spanking, and the one time my dad was German, so he had big hands. And
Oh,
Christ, that first one ever, never cried so much in my life. But I learned very quickly, and that
yeah.
was enough. Like, never, never not going against dad's will ever again. So even as I got older, didn't matter that I was bigger than him. I always thought, you know, he can put that meaty paw, or fucking, if I get out of line, I'm gonna get a slap in the face. I don't want that. It's embarrassing. So yeah, I know what you mean. I definitely understand it. It's very visceral too when you're understanding it. I know there's a lot of psychology when we talk about children and spanking and its effects, and there's been studies, but certain amounts of corporal punishment have also been proven to be beneficial. So it's one of these things that is going to be debated forever, but I don't want to make this about that. But I, something, because the way you were saying it, and I noticed the way when you're talking about spanking, you get the same way I do when I start talking about sadism. So that's really, I've got a good question here for you, is, do you think there's this connection between your personality and your interest in spanking? So, for example, does it balance or kind of amplify certain traits inside of you?
Yes, it does. And I think in the last 5 years, I've probably become a more stronger person because of it. I mean, what's the worst that happen? You're right. You're going to get spanked. Is kind of the saying in the community. But yeah, it's definitely affected my life, and I think in a good way for the most part.
Absolutely. I mean, you get to live the life that you want to live inside of a community that, again, I mean, it's such a substrata of the lifestyle. It's kind of like this hidden layer. I've seen it at dungeons and stuff, but I'm like, ah, okay, cool, a spanking scene, and I kind of move on. But I didn't really realize until I started looking into it how deep, and then sitting down with you today, how deep this all really goes. Literally, just little tiny pocket communities of everywhere around the country, around the world, just get together on like a Thursday night, and everybody does like a round the, round the table spanking type of thing. And I'm like, you're doing what? Like, how is, and I, that interestingly immediately drew an interest for me to look further into this. You know, do you see spanking as a standalone kink like I'm describing it, or does it really entwine with other dynamics and activities of your play?
Um, it can. Um, there's been some spankings and some rope play, some shibari. I think it does.
Oh
It does.
God, are you a rope person?
I am not. I tried.
Oh,
I have
oh,
failed many times. I've had
okay,
I can do like not one, not two, and that's it. And then I get out the hand straps and handcuffs. Um, but like spanking and sex are two different things for me, right? They
right.
don't go together. And unless I am sleeping with somebody and then they merge that way. But if I have somebody to come over and play, I don't expect sex from them. It doesn't happen. And they do, and I kind of wrote down the right way I like to phrase it. One doesn't really satisfy the other. So I could be horny and I can spank somebody, but I'm still horny. And or I could be sleeping with somebody, but I'm not spanking anybody, and that part of my life is missing. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, oh, 100%. Totally. I get that quite often. Especially if you're really in a heavy scene and it's with somebody for a long time, and then you want to go, you don't want it to take it further, but then the desire, it's you're talking about desire, pure unadulterated desire, and I can totally relate. Which that means now I get to ask you because now you're talking memory and evocation of those memories. What's the most memorable or meaningful spanking experience you've either had yourself as a spankee or delivered as a spanko?
Oh boy, I've had a few great ones. I I'll tell you a story. I met a girl in Vegas and at a party, and she was beautiful.
Didn't we
And
already say whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas?
we haven't. Like, I think that's a given, isn't it? Every playing land, like welcome to Vegas. What happens here stays here. Put your trays
Right.
in that right position. Yeah, that's kind of the way it is. So I met a girl in Vegas, beautiful girl. I kind of told her once or twice, I want to play with you. And I finally caught her one night, and she's like, pick the key up from somebody in the lobby, and go into my room and wait for me. And so I went up there, and I was bottoming, and she had me waiting in a chair. I think it was naked, looking out the hotel window, and I could see her walk by. And I was, you couldn't see me naked, but you could see my head. And she came in and we did a great scene. She talked to me about I think it was joining the BDSM church and being a sinner, and it was like fun and laughs, and I had a great time with her. Subspaced a lot, but then in the end, when it was done, we just kind of huddled up and talked, and there was some good conversation after that, and I felt like I really bonded with her, and that made that scene even better. And but there's also, on the other hand, other scenes where somebody has just beat me, and it was like a great beating, right? There was no wraparounds. Um,
So what makes it a great beating?
um, the way people do. So I'm sure in your community you have people who know what they're doing and who don't so much.
Sure.
If you get the wraparound and all of a sudden, a flogger hits you or a whip hits you on your stomach instead of your ass, or they're not hitting in the right spot. They don't know how to hit, or they start off with something extremely painful and then go right back to something extremely soft. You're not working in the right direction. When you spank somebody, you're going toward a harder and harder spanking, right? And some people don't get that. They just will hit you with something super hard, and then they'll grab something super light, and it just doesn't work that way. But Chris, I think the worst spanking I ever got was this girl who was talking all about spanking me, and we came down to it, and she slapped me on my ass where I could barely feel it, and then she said to me, "I hope that didn't hurt too much." And I was so mad, Chris. I was like going back through the drive-through mad. I couldn't believe it. I was like, "Oh, that's all I got." And I don't know how you feel about that, but
I think we've all been there when we think we deliver a good scene and then we don't. In our mind it's one way, but the reality is something a little bit different, if that makes sense. I can understand where you're coming from.
yeah,
um I've had scenes I'm like, oh my god, I thought that was amazing, and then I remember the sub looking back, it's like, yeah, okay, so that was like sub mediocre to me, and I'm like, you're deflated. It's a little bit of that feeling of feeling deflated. That was in my early days, and I definitely remember I made more mistakes doing things, and I've had a mentor for, I don't know, 12 years now, and I want to definitely get into that about mentors with you guys. But that's when I would talk to them, and I'm like, why? What am I missing here? What's my disconnect? Because I thought this, and it turned out to be this. And then they would point things out to me, and then I can alter technique, and then refine it, and then work on the next time that I do the scene, try again differently, and then reapproach it. Do you? Does your community also do that? Like, do you mentor people, or how did you? Because it's kind of the same thing I run into with dominance. You can't really this whole I'm just calling myself a dom for me doesn't work because I mentioned this before. I gave you the whole auto mechanic analogy before we started talking or recording the show today. But you can't do things without training. You can't just say, "Oh, well, I know how to use a flogger, but I've never picked one up in my life." I can't use a crop or a metal bar, or I'm going to electrocute you, and you don't know anything about that. You have to learn from somewhere. So for you, is it the same inside of your community, or how does that evolve?
So where I am, we have a great community. We have classes. I teach classes. I've taken classes from other people in this community, and I also belong to a national community. So when I go to their parties, there's classes that you can go to as well, and you can see, you go to a party, you see what people are doing, what does and doesn't work. And as far as mentoring people, I've had a couple mentors. The hard ones are the girls who want to be tops because then you're trying to top from the bottom, right? Um, but yeah, couples, single people, and right now I'm teaching classes. The last class I taught was a class on canes.
All right, you piqued my interest. Let's go, Spanko. Talk to me about some caning.
And what would you
Let's
like
go.
to
Let's
know?
go. Come on.
Well, the most
I'm.
important thing you need to know right now is canes are not native. Or canes are made of. Let's see if I start pulling off. I guess what do you want to know about canes?
Oh, you can see if you can teach me something new. The cane is
Something.
actually the device. If you're actually talking about what they're made of, that's a different story. But we relate to cane as the object, not so much what it's made of.
What it's made of. All right. So all canes need to be round. And if you're going to beat on more than one person with a cane, it probably should have something on it like a bear thing
Hmm.
so you can sanitize it. It's an important part of our community is sanitation and not spreading diseases.
Do you all spank between people? I got to stop you right there because that's. I no, I appreciate that. I totally agree with you. You wrap it and clean it, and that's fine. I don't do that because typically, so for me, a scene is usually it's one on one, right?
Right.
But you just said something that's really interesting. Do you do spanking? I'm so curious now. My mind is just going like a mile a minute. Do you have like a whole row of people like co-ed co-eds and grandmothers and retired truckers all like
Yeah.
bent over ready to be spanked?
There's a line that goes out the door and usually like tell people like after the stop sign I'm not taking more people. No, if I go to a party, I'll play with, a few people that night. Pretty easily here at my dungeon, maybe one person a night, sometimes two people a day, but everything I use has to be sanitized because I play with so many people, right? Not that I play with, even if I play with more than one person, it needs to be sanitized. So when I play with somebody, everything I use that can be sanitized, I throw on the floor. So if I cane somebody, that cane goes on the floor. If I use a wooden paddle, that goes on the floor. If I use a piece of leather that I can kind of wipe down, that goes on the floor. And then at the end of the scene, when everything's done, we've done the aftercare, they've left. I take Clorox wipes or Lysol wipes, and everything gets wiped down. And then
Yeah, I mean that's pretty standard. I mean, I do the same too. As a matter of fact, though, I'll make the person I'm doing the scene with. They will thank me after the scene, and then they will
yes,
get the privilege to clean the implements that we've used. But that's more again. You and I were talking beforehand. I'm into the more ritualistic side and protocol side, so that becomes part of it. That catharsis in it, the servitude in that submission. Do you? Is it more? Do you guys get in your community the whole dom sub, or is it really more spanko spanky reference?
I I think it's probably a little bit of both. Little column A, little column B. Some people like the top dom thing. Some people just want to be spanked and sent on their way. It kind of depends. And yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that. I also do sensual stuff too. So I have some people that come through and don't want to
Man,
be
it's like
spanked.
you all are just borrowing from every community. I admit I'll be a little bit jealous. So because you're just taking like the best parts from a lot of communities and putting them into one. So
One big pile.
yeah, yeah, I can imagine that. So and again, so this I start my mind starts racing with. Are there anything about? Is there anything about the Spanko community that you think people misunderstand about it that you wish more people understood about it?
From a vanilla standpoint of view,
Just any, but look, I had misconceptions before I talked to you, like I just told you. So I'll put it to you this way: 28, 29 years ago, before I really got involved in the community at all. So it was a couple years out. When somebody had ever mentioned BDSM to me, the only thing I ever thought it was you chain somebody up, you beat him with the whip, and you call him some names. And I couldn't understand why people liked it. That was my misconception. Total. Yes. Does that happen? Absolutely, it happens. But that's not what the community is, right?
right,
So when I was introduced to this topic, when a few people, Chris, do a show on spanking, and I'm like, what about it? Like, it's not. It's really it's warm up play before I'm going to do a scene. If I don't even really do it anymore because I don't, there's no enjoyment for me. But when I started looking into your community and looking at the people, the photographs, reading the stories, the personal stories that I came across, it's not. It's enlightenment is a great way for me to kind of phrase that. It's a real, this switch comes on and everybody kind of connects to it and they're locked in. So, but for me, again, like I told you at the beginning, I pretty much thought, okay, you put them over your knee and spank them, right? Before we started recording today, I told you, wow, pardon me, you're doing stuff with floggers, you're doing stuff with canes. Misconception came in, right? It was hand only, which is why I asked you about that before. So, are there any bigger misconceptions that you think that a lot of us, even lifestylers or vanilla, have about what you all do that you want people to really understand about your community?
so from the vanilla point, right? I think people don't get what it is that spanking satisfies or what the like is, right? I think they think it's something like you had mentioned where you're tying somebody up or you're just hitting on somebody and there's no cause or reason for it. Um, the people I meet that are vanilla that know what I do are a little shocked that I do it, but also a little, I don't know quite how to say it,
They're curious.
curious, yeah. But when I look at a scene that I do, right, and what they think is done, they're two different things. Like I have somebody that I'm spanking, and it's like a very intimate thing. They're happy, I'm happy, we're having a great time. In their mind, I think they're thinking somebody's like being beat beyond what they wanted. They're not having a great time, but I am because I'm like I'm the one hitting on them or whatever, right? I think that's a pretty big misconception about our community. Um, People in on Fetlife, some people it's their thing, some people isn't. It isn't their thing. I guess does that help you a little bit?
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely. That's it's part of it. I mean, this is me introducing. Not that your community needs a bigger introduction to the world, but to the rest of the world that A didn't know much about it, B's never heard about it, or C's got some sort of curiosity. Hey, you know what? My girlfriend slapped my ass, and I loved it. Why? This is what this is about today, right?
Right.
I don't get me wrong. Somebody, if I have somebody and they swap my ass and I'm in a relationship with them and I like it, great. It feels good. That doesn't mean no for me. Let me be very clear that I want to be spanked. Not going to ever happen. Not going to happen, Spanks, at all. Let's just
But
be clear.
yeah, you are, yeah. That and some people that's fine. They're just tops.
Yeah.
You'll
No,
switch. And some people are just
yeah,
tops.
I don't switch. I'm not greedy. And I'm very clear on this. I love the rope community. Y'all are just take forever. And number two, you switches are greedy. You want it all the time, and it's exhausting. So, yeah. Um,
Well, and we wake up in the morning. Some mornings like I want to spank somebody, and other days I'm like I want to be spanked. Um, and so you can go back and forth, and that's kind of nice too. Equally though, I don't know if you would know this, but both of them have the same impact on me psychologically, and so if I
no,
spank
that's
or
interesting though. I mean, and I've talked to switches before. Everybody's kind of different. I've interviewed or I've talked to switches that when they get into their submissive space, they're completely reduced down to the bitter core of servitude. When they're in their dominant space, It's about the catharsis of the power and the dynamic leading over that and control over another. So it is different for each person. Yeah, I've never woken up a day in my life and said, yes, I want to crawl to somebody. And for all those people who are going to send me letters out saying it's the greatest experience, don't even bother emailing me because it's never going to happen. I've had jokes over the years. You'll submit to me, especially from dominatrixes. Never going to happen. Like, never. I just, it's
I
not
guess
for me. But I get it. Like, I get what you're saying. And, the great part is I can hear it in your voice. It makes that, for me, understand you. Like, I hear the passion in your voice about it when you're doing both sides. And that's really fascinating to me. Is
yeah.
there, before you set up a scene, do you, because like I was just mentioning, like I'm heavily ritualistic. I love that aspect. Do you specifically have any rituals before you a scene or a specific implement you're going to use or anything that makes a scene particularly more enjoyable for you first than your partner?
So it depends on the scene. Usually about an hour before, y'all get all cleaned up, get ready to go, set up the dungeon for what I'm going to do. Um, and I like to. It's just the standard play. There's not much planning, but if there's somebody who like I want to do this and that, and then I start like to build it in my mind, right? Like we're gonna shrink wrap somebody to the spanking bench and play with their nipples, and that's what we're gonna do, and I start to build that in my mind, and then when they show up, usually we'll have a quick talk, make sure nothing's changed, make sure we're still good to play, they're in the right headspace, and then we'll play from there. So that's kind of my little routine, I would say.
Right. I mean, no, I get that. I guess if there's some days like, hey, I'm only feeling the cane today, or today it's all about the, you know, leather floggers or wooden paddles. That's all I'm doing today. So yeah, I get it. I think that's it's really relatable is probably the best way you can say it. Because in my mind, I'm clicking through what you're saying, and I'm like, yep, I do that. Yep, yep, I get that. Do you think, because you mentioned, and FetLife's a good place, fetish.com is another place that, I kind of co-inhabit. And of course, I see some of it on Instagram. Do you think, though, that the larger Spanko community is well understood, or even as far as it goes, well represented inside of the BDSM community? Do you think do you think they're synonymous when they come together, or do you think it kind of stands alone?
That's an interesting question because I've looked around other places in the country, and some places on FetLife just have swinger parties. And some of the people I talked to who I thought would have rather large communities don't have a big impact, what's called impact play community, right? Where I live, we have a very big impact community. Um,
Yes.
we do lots of things, and so people are like, "Where do you live?" And I tell them, and they're like, "What?" But somehow or other I managed to, and I'm very fortunate to end up in a community that's this big and this large and does great things.
I did. For those of you who don't know, and I will link his screen name. You can find him on FetLife. But you're in Idaho. I'm just going to leave it at that. They can look more if they want. I actually interviewed earlier this year another couple, I believe, from your hometown or where you're at right now. I did because I did a show on like parenting and how
Mm-hmm.
you have that conversation actually with your kids, and it was a couple from your state, if not where you live. So they were talking about how they're very involved in the community there and how it's steadily growing, which I found interesting because no, it's not the Mormon state, right? Idaho is not big Mormons, is it?
No, we don't. So I lived in the capital, Boise, and I would say it's probably 50-50. But when you leave Boise, it starts to become a lot more.
Wow. Okay.
But I think Warren people are pretty kinky too, Chris. I
I
mean,
bet you the Mormons are way kinky. I'm not even gonna. Sorry to any of the Mormons out there, but look, I was raised Catholic. Don't even get me started on the fetishes that I had from that. Right.
mhm.
So I think that was another thing too, because see, I never was bad enough in school that I got swatted with a ruler or anything. But the on occasion, the nuns would hit you like on the knuckles with rulers, and that was bad enough. I like the pain, so that's for me. I think where my sadism probably started. But um, yeah, I agree with you. I probably think the Mormons are really like I don't know. they're doing some weird kinky shit in the barn. Like they're doing these weird ties, or uh, there's a weird flogging session going on, or something. I guarantee it. There's got to be Mormon porn out there. That's going to be so.
There is actually a Mormon porn, like Mormon sex, whatever. It's not a BDSM thing, but there is. I think in Utah, the rumor is that you kind of join the community and then they search you out and then there's a party, but it's not on Fetlife.
Right.
You know, posted. It's kind of like you get a phone call in the middle of the night at 2 a.m. Go, tomorrow afternoon at 7.
Yeah, yeah. You knock three times and you spin in a circle and you're in. Yeah, no, I get it.
Right.
I can imagine the Mormons are pretty keen. Nothing against you Mormons. Again, don't send me some angry email because first off, I'm probably not going to read it. And then unless it's an email about yes, we do these things, and you want to be on the show, and then I'm going to bring you back on with Dr. Spanko and I can talk to you about this stuff. But um, angry emails will be deleted. Uh,
Exactly.
if somebody's new is coming into you, sees you at a party, young lad, a young lass, if you will, and it's like, ooh, I want to do what he's doing. How how do the how do you want somebody to approach you?
Um, hey, you want to do what I'm doing? Watch, come up and talk to me, ask some questions. And then my advice to them, being where I am, is we have a one-on-one class. Take that. Start going to classes, learn, watch people at other events, learn. There is plenty of education in this community if you want it.
Okay. I
And
still haven't convinced me to get all behind it. I love some of the stuff you're doing. So when you said canes and floggers, I'm in. So I'm, we're at the point where like I have a friend of mine in my group. He designs stuff, but it's typically for us. So I'd come up with I jokingly came up with an idea of a flogger that at the end had small blades, and then on the throughout it, it had from the barbed wire just the barbs, and so then he went and made it. So that type of spanking with that implement would be intensely arousing to me. But a warm up scene doing what you do is, I see the draw. Like I really see the draw because there's an intensity there. You're feeling that it's the connection at some level when you're warming somebody or you're still touching. There is that intimacy behind it. And do you feel that with each person or is it more robotic?
Oh no, definitely feel it. I wouldn't say with each person, but the majority of people, I definitely feel it. I love that. I love that intimacy. I like that feeling. We bonded for a while, and sometimes it's hard. It's hard. You have a good scene, and when they say goodbye at the front door, it's almost like you lost like a lifelong lover, right? It's just
Right.
goes in your brain, but you're kind of like, well, am I going to see you again? And it passes the next day. But I love that part of it.
So let's get this one out there for the people who are probably going to ask because they're going to hear you and go, "Oh my God, I want to be spanked by Doctor Spanko. I want to spank Doctor Spanko." Do you have somebody solid in your life that you? Or it's like this is the only person I do X with, or are you just a come as you are type of person?
Uh, no pun intended, right?
No pun intended at all. I just caught that. Thank you very well.
I am still single. I don't know if I'll ever meet the person, but I hope I will. But I'm going to play until I do. Being in this community, doing what I do, is kind of a double-edged sword. You,
Explain.
you meet a nice vanilla girl, things are going good. At some point in time, you have to tell you're kinky, and it isn't like I have a box under my bed or a drawer I stick it in. I have like a dungeon. So there is that conversation, and sometimes they just outright run for the hills, and other times they're okay. And that makes it a little more difficult to get a partner for life or whatever you might call it.
No, I mean again, it makes sense. It's not easy to bridge. I mean, you're kind of getting into my jam now, where when we start talking about how do we bridge the gap between the vanilla world and I think I actually did a show and I've talked or written about it before, but how do we bridge that gap between vanilla and our lifestyle? And it can be difficult because I think, again, the first thing we're starting with is a lot of misconceptions with people. There is a natural proclivity and inclination, I think, for people to want to elevate some of their sex lives to some degree or their have an erotic fantasy. I think it's an ease in thing. Um, but yeah, sometimes there is no crossover, and then we make the decision whether we're with that person and we have a separate life, or and we agree to it, or we subside that part of ourselves. Because I've been in and out, I've taken breaks in the BDSM community before, and ultimately returned. It's not, can't do it. I mean,
It
it's why I
happens to a
do it.
lot
It's
of
why I do
people.
what I now, talking to you and writing and working with people. I mean, I work with veterans mostly, but I still work with a lot of people from the community and help them normalize what's going on in their lives.
You talked about a misconception. Can we go back to
Yes.
that for a second?
Yes, please.
One of the big misconceptions in these two worlds colliding, right, the BDSM world and the vanilla world, is that I sleep with everybody. Like they will see this and
Oh,
automatically assume that every person I have ever like played with in my entire life I have slept with, and that is not true at all.
so you're not a big dirty hoe.
I am not a big dirty hoe. I am a big dirty BDSM hoe, but not so much that way. I'm not a swinger.
Well, are you a BDSM hoe or are you a Spanko hoe?
I'm a Spanko hoe too.
Okay, so well, BDSM hoes are not. No,
Are
we
they a
talked.
different breed?
We talked about that. BDSM and sex are not synonymous. Yes, I'm saying that again. That's the hill I die on. If you're old school like me, BDSM and sex are not synonymous. Spanking is a different story, though.
Um, yeah, spanking and sex still two different things for me.
Do
Um,
you have? Okay, fine. Let's go personal then. You wanted to crack that door open, and I'm going to barge through it like I'm a SWAT team. And I was for a while, but anyway, do you have some of your scenes that will lead from spanking into intimacy? You know, I
uh,
don't need we don't need graphic details. That's not what this is about. But I'm talking about that raw primal, the primalist nature of getting into something like that with somebody.
I would say it happens once in a while, but it goes the other way for me. So if I'm having sex with somebody and then I spank them, like not at that night, but relationship wise, then yes. If I'm spanking somebody, then usually no. It's kind of like a little hill I have to climb.
Have you ever had anybody orgasm from your spankings?
Oh yeah.
Interesting. Without too much graphic detail, that's still a kind of a well, it's not a family show, but I was about to lie to you and say it's a family show. That's a lie. Um,
Depends
Again,
on.
we don't need massive graphic details, but how did that transpire? As I
Oh,
think that's going to pique a lot of interest because you caught my attention.
that happens quite a bit. And I was,
Really?
yes, and I was talking to a girl the other day, and I'm like, when you grab their two butt cheeks and you go back and forth and they squish, and she goes, yeah, right. Yes, that happens quite a bit. It's the way you play, and I think a lot of people see spanking as a punishment, but it
Of
can also be
course.
a reward.
Of course. 100%. Totally agree.
But yeah, it's kind of
Positive
what I go for.
reinforcement. Yeah. Interesting. Is it? What was the first time for you like when that happened with somebody?
Boy, that was a long time ago. Um,
Come on, you're not that old. Your memory's good. You're like me. I'm like we're both about the same age.
I'm
I think
trying to
we're
pin down the moment I learned, or I realized that the girl was coming from it. Um, I honestly couldn't tell you. Whether it was in college, a girl I spanked then, or after that. But I'm not surprised. Like when it happens, I'm not surprised. Like that's kind of like what I go for.
interesting. See, for me, it's different, right? Because me, it's about the delivery of the pain, and
Hmm.
then them, the masochist, taking the delivery of the abuse to release their pain. So for me, that isn't the same, right? Because I don't do a lot of. I'm kind of beyond the whole great orgasm denial or extreme organ. I'm beyond all that. It doesn't do much. I'm different aspects of it. I've seen it on rare occasions, which is interesting for me because then, I start asking questions, but to hear that it happens more often than not inside of your community is a lot more interesting because you're talking about tapping into psychosexual fantasies that relate to that punishment of the naughty girl or the naughty boy, and then releasing that um, in that orgasmic wave for them. So that pleasurable way that becomes that crashing wave over themselves.
Yeah, there's some mental in it, but it's also in the way that you spank them.
I can imagine that. It's just okay. So then that will lead me to this. How has being part of this community for you helped you understand yourself more and even relationships with other people?
That's an interesting question.
I tend to ask them.
Yes, you do. Well, you did warn me something about a SWAT team kicking in my door, right?
Yep.
Uh, so, what was the question again? How has it changed me and my community?
How has you being a part of this community, growing inside of it, developing your technique, teaching, being a part of a national association of Spankos, how has that really made you understand yourself better and led to better relationships with other people?
I think it's helped me grow as a person a lot. Teaching has helped me grow as a person a lot. Patience, I've gotten a lot more patience over the years. I've also learned to have a lot more. Role play has taught me to have a lot more serious conversations than I normally have. My communication skills are definitely better than they were a long time ago. And I've learned to like work with people a lot more social skills, I would say.
Have you has there been a crossover for you? So I don't want to. I mean, I'll leave it up to you, and I'm not going to say what it is. But have you noticed from your private life this entity that you are involved in, your passion? Let's call it what it is. You have a passion for this, like I have a passion for sadism, right? So have you noticed there is a bleed over now in the way into your professional life at all, in a positive way? Not like you want to spank a client. I'm not. Some of you people need to get your mind out of the gutters. I know what they're thinking. I can hear the questions already. So
I won't say
I'm
that that thought hasn't crossed my mind a couple times.
I'm sure it has. Yep. Yep.
Um, yeah, I tend to notice. I took a class the other day. I won't say in what, and I tended to notice all the BDSM things that just happened to pop up, and I was kind of in awe about the whole thing. As far as it spilling over to my personal life, yeah, some people know what I do and they're okay with it. Um, yeah, I don't really know where to go with that answer.
Well, I mean, you're talking about being a better communicator, learning to talk more, which that allows us when part of doing business is sometimes you got to listen, right? Not 50% of a negotiation is sometimes not talking first. It's letting them talk. So that's something we can learn, or we're learning to listen to their needs. For me, doing this as well, not the show, but working inside of the community and then working with people privately. After all, half of my life being involved here, it's one thing that writing or sitting and doing interviews or doing shows or whatever, I've learned to listen. Like I hear better you know so it really has allowed me in a professional capacity, even when I'm doing consulting, I'm listening to what they want before I'm reacting and telling them what's going to happen,
Yeah, and really listening to what they're saying, right? Not just what they're saying, but what they're really
what
saying.
they're really saying. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I'm really kind of getting at. So um do you, for you, think that spanking creates any sort of unique sense of connection between, so like, what makes it so special?
When I'm with the person I'm with or in my life. Like, are you talking about the person I'm spanking or what?
Yeah, I mean, what's is it just the connection of the spanking, or is it does it feel more primal inside? Does it feel instinctual? Does it feel, are we becoming reductionist again? Do we feel that those fleeting memories of when we were spanked? I get very nervous when I start talking about reversing or regression towards childhood, and I think you can understand for a reason why I don't want to say that, even though you and I have talked about those things. I don't want to go that far, but I do want to say, does it cross these certain lines that's really enigmatic for two people?
So you asked about my connection with the person I'm
Right.
spanking. Um, it's so there's a lot of intimacy in it, and when you sit down and you talk to somebody, they're going to be naked on top of you probably if you're spanking them over your knee. You need to have a pretty good communication about that, right? You need to have some permissions, you need to have some limits. Um, but in that play, there's there's humor and there's fun and there's an orgasm maybe and you're having a good time and you're really bonding. And when you have that experience and the headspace that you have is great. It is a very bonding experience. You know, the chemical part of it. I don't know if you're probably aware of all that.
Sure. The endorphin rush, the serotonin, the dopamine. Absolutely. You're talking about the neurobiological factors that heavily affect us in all of our play.
Right. So all that comes out, right? And you're with a person, you're naked, you're spanking, you're having a great time. It is a very good experience. It's going to the amusement park or going to a show or doing something with somebody where you're laughing and you're having a good time and you have all those good feelings. And that is a great experience. And whether you're being spanked or you're spending time with somebody that you love or you're a good friend, that is just a great thing to have.
Awesome. Now, lately, I've been on this kick about talking about vulnerability. Seems to be a fan favorite. I don't know why. I write about whatever, but lately I've been talking about that. So, with that being said, I'm going to ask you something about vulnerability here because I think it's kind of important to men don't talk about vulnerability enough. And it's not for me to, like, have you break down and cry. That's not what the point of this is. But what role does vulnerability? I didn't prep this question for you, but I thought about it while we're sitting here. And so I wrote some notes. What role does vulnerability play for you in your experiences with spanking? And how does it affect your connection to a partner?
So you're definitely going to be vulnerable, and either way, right? Whether I'm top or bottom, I'm definitely going to be
That
vulnerable.
that aspect, absolutely. The spanky, I can understand the vulnerability part, but you, as in the spanko part,
Um, Boy, some things come out of my mouth sometimes that probably shouldn't. You're going to get to know me a lot better as a person.
for
If
example.
uh, Boy, I may say something to you that I wouldn't. There's that intimacy bond, right? So
Okay.
you say things, you do things, secrets go back and forth. Um, there's kind of that. I mean, I'm not going to tell anybody why I'm spanking in my life story or about my dog that died, anything like that. But there's definitely a little bit of vulnerability there. More, I think, on the bottom's part. Like I have some girls come over, and we just have a talk, basically. But of course, they're over my knee and they're getting spanked when they say something they shouldn't, like I'm not good enough. There's that vulnerability, I think, more so than on my part.
Makes sense. That makes a lot of sense, though. All right. Have you? Well, I'm going to stay in the emotional realm here for a minute because this is my jam, my other jam. Have you ever used spanking as a way to kind of navigate some difficult emotional times or to feel grounded during a challenging time?
For me personally, or on somebody else.
Uh, y- I'm going to leave it open.
So me personally, oh yeah, like if I'm bottoming and somebody's does a great job, that headspace is amazing. You know that if I've got problems for 2 hours, those problems disappear. It's hard to worry about something when somebody's spanking you and you're kicking and screaming, having a great time. That really can clear your mind. As
Have you
far
ever?
as
Okay. Have you
oh,
ever
go ahead.
cried during a scene?
No,
Has
no,
anyone ever cried from you spanking them? Not in a way because I'm talking about. I'm talking about the catharsis side.
the emotional side,
Yeah.
and yeah, definitely people have. Some girls will come over like, I just want you to spank me till I cry, and sometimes you don't have to spank them hard at all. They're just in tears and like, I just needed that.
Right.
It seems to me, and I talked to somebody about cutting the other day, but it builds, right? It builds, and you just have to break it sometimes, like
No, that's understandable. I
like
totally get that. Yeah,
like
scenes kind
like
of get.
you food.
Yeah, scenes get to a point, and you know that your partner's kind of winding it down. So, um, wow, I'm not gonna lie, you've given me quite a bit here that for me, you've enlightened me to the community more than again. So this is kind of this moment. I kind of feel like I'm regressing back about 28 years where I had this, you just put everybody over your knee and spank them and that's it. Um, me as, I hate calling myself a scientist, but that's technically what my job is. But I don't do the research side. You're giving me a lot more to think about here because it's so not what I thought it was. I really thought this was going to be more about yes, I put him over my knee, or maybe I will put him on a table, and it's just bare bottom spanking all the time. And it's not. There's so much more emotional connection here, and so much more rooted inside of your community than I think me, at least for myself, than I anticipated.
I'm glad. I'm glad we chatted.
I am too, you know. And by the way, we all don't have to agree and like everything. Just because he's a spanko and I'm not, doesn't mean I condemn it. Right? He gets to do his kink. His kink's not my kink. His
That's
kink is
right.
still awesome.
That's what
Just
we
so
say. That's not my kink. Yeah.
yeah, we all got to remember that now and then. I've seen a lot of people firing stuff up, and that's as far as I'm going to go with that comment. Um, Look, I want to say thank you to you. I know you've got a commitment coming up, and I got to let you go here. So I want to say a huge thank you to you for spending 6 weeks with me, going back and forth. It feels like, and finally nailing down some time to talk to me today and talk about this fascinating passion you have for this. It feels like a really small but absolutely huge part of our community.
Well, thanks for having me, Chris. I learned a lot from talking to you today too. It was a pleasure to be on your show.
Well, this is why I do it. This is why I want people here. We keep growing our community. We keep understanding. Hey, this could draw more people to this community. You never know. I don't know if I ever poise up in Boise, I might come up and watch a scene. Haven't been there in a while, but might head out that direction more sooner than later. Listen, for everybody, I'm going to put DrSpankologist profile name on the show description. It'll be linked on Fetlife and a couple of other places. You can find him there. You can go reach out, talk to him maybe about maybe setting up a scene or the classes that he teaches. You can inquire and look there further. I have a few more shows left to do before the end of the year wrap up. That's going to be coming up soon here in a few weeks. I have one more interview coming. Somebody reached out to me from the Middle East, from the UAE, after my Middle East show. They want to talk. I'm going to try to get that interview in for the end of the year. But with all that said and done, everybody, until next time, be safe, stay king.